The Denver Broncos collapse and open up the wild card race in the AFC. That and more on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready. Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome in to the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman Tyler Rowland, joined today by Locked On NFL expert David Harrison. On today's episode, we're going to talk about some big-time matchups in the AFC, specifically the Commanders against the Eagles. We got some big matchups in the AFC. Steelers, Ravens, anybody. I'm going to give you my best bets of the weekend in those games with some help from David as well. But we got to start with this crazy Thursday night football game where the Denver Broncos absolutely collapse at the end. Before we do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen and for being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Hillsdale College. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. This game was an entertaining Thursday night football game, David. The Chargers end up coming out on top in a high-scoring affair, but the Broncos got up early, and then Justin Herbert happened. We're going to talk about the ramifications here in the AFC and the Broncos side of it, but I got to give credit where credit is due and come out. Justin Herbert made incredible plays in this game. The throw that he made rolling to his left to the end zone on the touchdown, that truly is not to be hyperbolic, but one of the best throws I've ever seen with pressure on him and getting hit. Just unbelievable talent, and to me, he was the shining star of the night and really jumped off the screen.
Yeah, it was a really good game overall for Justin Herbert, and it didn't start that way, right? Like in the first half, man, I thought we were gonna be sitting here talking about, was Justin Herbert overhyped and all this early talk, even going into last season, was it something that he hadn't earned yet, and were people getting too ahead of themselves with him? But I mean, he comes back, and yeah, you're right, that touchdown pass there in the second half was a thing of beauty. I mean, you can't help but be in awe of it. But I think on the other side of this thing too, Tyler, like the Denver Broncos, man. I mean, I don't know. Sean Payton is not known for being appreciative of lack of discipline, and I think the Denver Broncos have a lot of points to look at in this game where they basically gave away any momentum that they had built up in the first quarter, including right there at the end of the first half. And it's amazing how quickly this game can turn, but in a game of two halves, you want to be on the team that's living the better second half, not the better first half. The Denver Broncos learned that the hard way tonight.
Yeah, and I think that is something where the long-term focus of the team, you got to kind of tune it in here, because the Broncos are a team that's maybe 1 year ahead of where people thought they would be. And with Bo Nix as a rookie, and it's like, they make some of these mistakes that a team at the beginning of, I think that's something that you probably experienced in Washington with the Commanders, a young team that's maybe a little bit ahead of schedule, that has some mistakes that they make in some big games. And you talked about it at the end of the first half with the penalty that gives the Chargers a chance to get that free kick, which was a crazy, crazy occurrence. But also you think about the shot to Justin Herbert's head when he's sliding in the second half, giving them a free first down on what would have been a field goal chance, and it immediately turns into a Gus Edwards touchdown. So I think the Broncos just made some dumb mistakes in the game that really hurt them, and that's literally what my guy Cody Roark from Locked On Broncos focused on after the game.
The Denver Broncos suffer a massive collapse in the second half against the Los Angeles Chargers, fall to 9-6. This is Cody Roark, host of Locked On Broncos, and it was a tale of two halves here for the Broncos and the Chargers on Thursday Night Football. The Broncos had a 21-13 lead at halftime, but in the second half they couldn't get off the field. Penalties capsized them in the second half, and they couldn't find an adjustment to Ladd McConkey and Chargers wide receivers on crossing patterns. This loss is a big one here for the Broncos. Their final two games against the Cincinnati Bengals and Kansas City Chiefs, they're not going to be easy. Denver has to win to get into the postseason, and those are two tough games right there. The run game was going on in the first half, couldn't get any rhythm in the second half here. So now the Broncos, their backs are up against the wall with 2 games remaining, with 2 tough opponents left on the schedule. Make sure you check out Locked On Broncos, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts.
And David, that's exactly where I want to go next. Because the Broncos have lost this game. Now, both them and the Chargers sit at 9-6. And I'm not very good at math, David, but 2 more losses for both those teams. And that's 8 losses. The Colts, the Dolphins, the Bengals, all at 8 losses. The Bengals play the Denver Broncos next game. There is a possibility here that one of these 3 6-8 teams could climb their way back into the AFC Wild Card race. David, I guess at the end of the day, Colts, Dolphins, Bengals, which team do you believe in most can make that push?
I would go Bengals. I mean, I know it's not been the greatest season in the world for the Cincinnati Bengals, but look, at the end of the day, man, just get in the tournament. You know what I mean? Get in the tournament, and you got Jamar Chase, you got Joe Burrow. Like that's really all you need, and you had that experience. I mean, there's still a little bit of a climb here, but again, I mean, the Broncos have that tough schedule to end the season. The Chargers have a little bit of an easier road to hoe, so it really kind of seems like there's probably one spot that might come open here. But look, man, I mean, nobody's ever going to ask a team to apologize for winning, right? And nobody should ever be blaming an NFL team for their schedule. But when you look at the Denver Broncos and even the Los Angeles Chargers to a certain extent, when we talk about who have you beaten, Tyler, I take division opponents out of the picture, because the problem with putting division opponents saying, well, the Chargers just beat a playoff caliber team in the Broncos. Well, the Broncos just went toe to toe with a playoff caliber team in the Chargers. Okay, you're in the same division. You're playing these same opponents. So when you have a lesser strength of schedule going up against each other, your records are going to be inflated. Look at the NFC North if you need to look at an example. The only team that the Denver Broncos have beaten that's seriously in playoff contention are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Atlanta Falcons, which are both part of one of the worst divisions in football, and they're in playoff contention because they play in one of the worst divisions in football. And by the way, the Buccaneers are leading that division, yet the Falcons swept them. So which one is better? Which one is good? Right. So the Denver Broncos are a team that, yes, they are a little bit ahead of their schedule as far as rebuilding, but they're also benefiting from their schedule. And so people are saying that about the Washington Commanders as well. So I have experience dealing with those types of situations. Now, as you get into December football, this is where the difference between the Broncos and Chargers, in my opinion, we've already kind of hit on it, Tyler. The Denver Broncos are a team that can win games. Justin Herbert is a quarterback that can win you games. That, to me, was the difference tonight. That is the difference between these two teams. When you look at the Broncos schedule, Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, if he plays, are quarterbacks that can win you football games. The Denver Broncos are a team that can win. There's the big differences there. And for the Washington Commanders, moving forward, we'll see what happens this weekend. They believe Jaden Daniels is a quarterback that can win you football games. So when you're one of these teams that's trying to make these pushes, you've got to kind of evaluate yourself compared to that. And if you're the Denver Broncos, you're happy with what you've done, sure. But if you're a Broncos fan, I mean, this was an opportunity, man. You win this game, you're like 98% in the playoffs. Now that this game has been lost, I don't see how you have any confidence that you were actually going to get in there, unless, fingers crossed, the Chiefs don't need to win week 18.
Yeah, that's something that they could benefit from. But I think, it's just crazy that they play the Bengals next week. I agree. The Bengals are like a team that you can't give up on because the talent and how well Joe Burrow is playing. But I think realistically, the Colts are actually the team that stands in the best position. They have the tiebreaker head-to-head over the Dolphins. They have a massive tiebreaker and conference record over the Bengals. And you look at the last 3 games for the Colts, they play the Titans this weekend at home. Then they're at the New York Giants, and they finish at home with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Those are 3 incredibly winnable games. So I think, for me, it's going to be either the Bengals out of sheer talent and they find a way, or it's going to be the Colts, who are actually in a great position to do it as well. But it just made the AFC wild card just a little bit more interesting. But with that being said, we got some big-time matchups in the AFC that are very interesting as well. It's Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the most fun and easiest way to play daily fantasy sports. That's why they have over 10 million members and billions, that's right, billions of dollars in awarded winnings. Prize Picks makes daily fantasy sports accessible to all, because all you got to do is pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. You run your game all season long on Prize Picks, America's daily fantasy sports app that is ranked number one. Look, it's so easy. You just pick 2 to 6 players. You say whether they're going to do more or less. Jared Goff, more than 230 passing yards. Saquon Barkley, more than 1 touchdown. And again, you get a chance to win up to 1,000 times your money. Right now, download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. It's Prize Picks. Run your game. Today's episode is also brought to you by the College Football Playoff on TNT. It's that time of year again, folks. The College Football Playoff is back, and with the newly expanded 12-team format, it is guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the College Football Playoff begins December 21st, starting with the College Football Playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into our first matchup, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the College Football Playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. All right, David, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. Talked about that great Thursday night football game and all of the implications in the AFC that it creates. But now we want to move to some of the heavy hitters in the AFC as I get into my best bets of the weekend. And just like last week, we're going to have a little madman matchup where me and David go head to head on a game. We like different sides, so that should be fun. But this first matchup that we need to look at is the Kansas City Chiefs, who we mentioned in the first segment, who feels like you can't not mention this time of year. They're playing the Houston Texans. The game is in Kansas City, and the Texans are 3.5-point underdogs. David, I love the Texans getting the 3.5, and a lot of it has to do with a matchup on the edge between Kansas City's offense and then Houston's defense. And crossover Thursday, Locked On Chiefs, Locked On Texans, talked about that matchup in the game.
One of the things you talk about, Danielle Hunter, and you talk about Will Anderson, and I think that's a great place to start when you start talking about matchups in this game, because you're looking at a situation, and I'm guessing based on what happened last week and the fact that Humphries hasn't played, that they're going to be going up against Joe Thuney, who is a left guard, not a tackle, and Juwan Taylor. Juwan Taylor's been okay. He's been better this season than he was last year. Not what you would want probably as your starting right tackle for the money that you're paying him, but Joe Thuney is a phenomenal left guard, but he's not going to be playing there. And now you're in a situation where you're going to have him go up against a guy that's leading the NFL in sacks and pressures, and that's going to be a tough assignment for him. And I do think that one of the things Kansas City needs to focus on this week is trying to maybe run directly at him.
They're going to have to try to do something because Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson is the best edge group in the NFL for my money. And the offensive tackle spot has been a major issue all year for Kansas City in their games. And Mahomes may play in the game, sure, but there's no way he's 100%. So for me, with maybe a possibly limited mobility Patrick Mahomes, the advantage already that the Texans will have there, I am taking the Texans plus 3.5. I don't know if they'll win, but I love the number 3.5. I look for it every week, and I like this one.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely like the Houston Texans to keep it close, right? And I think it's going to be a little bit of a defensive battle. I agree with you. Like Pat, he may be out there, but he's certainly not 100%. This offense hasn't been, what the Chiefs' offense of the past has been when he is healthy, and certainly even this season when he's been his healthiest, they haven't been that. The over-under on this thing, 41.5 points. That's a really good line because this thing, I mean, if this thing's like 20-17, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised. So there's some interesting math here to do, but yeah, I mean, if you want to roll the dice on Houston plus 3.5, I don't hate those points. And if you want to even throw the under, I'd probably take a chance on that too. I think this is going to be possibly a fairly fast game, right? Running clock type of situation potentially, but I don't think there's gonna be a lot of points with both of these teams coming in with strong defenses and both of these teams coming in with offenses that are either wounded or, just all season long with the Houston Texans at least haven't been able to do much up front to help out CJ Stroud.
Yeah, their down-to-down consistency in Houston has been terrible this year. They've been living off big plays and things like that. And when you get against the Chiefs and they like to bring pressure, one of the most heavy blitz teams in the NFL, you don't really have time to set up those big plays down the field. So I think they're going to have to do something that they don't do very well, which will also keep the scoring down. So I'm with you in that sense. The under is good for the underdog. You know, the less amount of points, the more likely it is that they're close in points. So I'm with you there on that. But yeah, I love Houston this week. That's one of my best bets of the week. Moving forward, another big AFC matchup. We have the Pittsburgh Steelers against the Baltimore Ravens. And I feel like no matter what happens with these two teams, this is always a good game. I know that Pittsburgh didn't look very good last week against the Philadelphia Eagles, but something about it being a division game makes a difference. And there's one specific area where Pittsburgh seems to always have an advantage over Baltimore, and it's in the trenches when defense and offense are matched up. And I think the Pittsburgh Steelers defensive line and pass rushers could continue to have that edge against the Baltimore Ravens, and that's something that Locked On Steelers and Locked On Ravens talked about on Crossover Thursday.
Yeah, and I think that Pittsburgh's defensive line is a textbook example of a line that does give the Ravens offensive line issues. You know, they struggle with more physical defensive fronts. Kansas City with guys like Chris Jones over there, obviously what Pittsburgh brings to the table with their plethora of guys. Philadelphia dominated them from start to finish in the trenches because of just how physical they are defensively. So when there aren't as many physical guys, the Ravens offensive line looks great. And it's really on the interior. Guys like Patrick McCary, Daniel Falele, which sometimes struggle with those physical players. Roger Rosengarten's been incredible as a rookie, really has settled in there at the right tackle position. Ronnie Stanley's had a bounce-back season. He bet on himself, actually chopped the last year off of his deal to bet on himself this year, and it certainly seems like it's going to pay off for him. And then Tyler Linderbaum is one of the best centers, if not the best center in the NFL right now. So the offensive line has had to gel and grow. Certainly was a point of contention at the start of the season, and they've had to certainly go through some downs to get to where they are today.
And I think a down is coming because Alex Highsmith didn't play in the last game. He's going to play in this one. So with that being said, I like the Steelers plus 6.5. The Steelers, for their standards, for Pittsburgh Steelers standards, they got embarrassed last week, losing by 14 points to Philadelphia. I think the Steelers come out with a much better game plan. Division games are always close. 6.5 is too much. Give me the Steelers plus 6.5.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you look at the history between these two teams, you know, and this is another situation where I'm going to tell you division games are different. Like when I use that in the previous conversation under a different context, but in this one, I'm going to tell you, don't look at that Philadelphia Eagles game and the Steelers team and say, oh, look what they did against the Eagles. They're not that good. They're getting exposed. And now we're going against the Ravens. So remember, Mike Tomlin has a Lamar Jackson package. Like this dude literally has a already crafted, ready to go. We just got to fine tune it for the context of the situation and the personnel we have to go up against Lamar Jackson. He used it against Jaden Daniels and was actually pretty effective. And that's the first time I've actually heard Mike Tomlin talk about his Lamar Jackson kind of blueprint template that he's already got. Things
Jackson rules.
Yeah. And, you know, and look, Lamar Jackson, people have talked a lot about his struggles against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Well, don't forget, the Pittsburgh Steelers have never won in Philadelphia, which still blows my mind to this day that we might see the Detroit Lions win a Super Bowl before the Pittsburgh Steelers win a game in Philadelphia. So you look, these types of things matter when these two teams know each other. Yeah, man, 6.5 point spread. I know there's no Pickens, you know what I mean? And certainly that's big, but these two teams know each other. These coaches know each other. I mean, this thing is going to be a knockdown, drag out. I mean, if this spread is more than 3 points, then it's a little bit of a surprise sometimes. So yeah, I think that spread is worth taking a roll on.
I could not believe that it was 6.5. I thought it was going to be like 4.5, something like that. But you know, the extra 6 in these games that are decided by field goals and low scoring in the AFC North, I got to take advantage of that. So with that being said, though, we got to move to the NFC because there are some good NFC matchups and NFC teams that we got to keep our eye on here. Plus the Madman matchup of the week. Me and David will face off on a line with an NFC AFC matchup. It's Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Hillsdale College. History, economics, the great works of literature, the meaning of the U.S. Constitution. Did you study these things in school? Probably not. Or even if you did, maybe it's time for a refresher. Time and technology have changed a lot of things, but they have not changed basic fundamental truths about our world. and our place in it. Our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses, including Constitution 101, the meaning and history of the Constitution, Introduction to Free Market Economics, or my personal favorite, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Republic. All of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced, so you can start whenever, you can tune in wherever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, or just enjoy the lectures. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. hillsdale.edu/lockedon. All right, David, let's cap off today's edition of Locked On NFL. We talked about that Thursday night football game. Justin Herbert goes crazy. The Broncos choke and open up the AFC Wild Card to some potential changes. Just when we thought it was completely over. No, they are back in it. Talked about two big games between the AFC heavyweights. We'll say what's funny is those exact four teams are going to switch matchups and play 5 days later on Christmas. So I found that very, very interesting. But we will move to an NFC team that I am very interested in hearing about from the source himself, David Harrison. The Eagles take on the Commanders, and we saw this game last time. It's a rematch. The score wasn't too crazy in the last matchup, but it didn't feel as close as the score would tell you that it was. Philadelphia dominated in this game, but David, regardless of that, I like the Commanders plus 3.5 in this game. Now, you're, like I said, in the trenches. I know that they lost, and it looked ugly last time, but what do you feel about the Commanders' chances this time around?
You know, there's two sides of this conversation. One side of this conversation is that the Washington Commanders took a 4-point lead into the fourth quarter in Philadelphia in Week 11, Thursday Night Football. That's important to remember. The other side of that conversation is they held Saquon Barkley to a 3.5 yards per carry average in the first half. Now, the flip side of this point, they also allowed Saquon Barkley to have a 7-yard per carry average in the second half. And granted, a big chunk of that came on 2 touchdown runs, which basically put the game away for the Philadelphia Eagles. But that right there is the trend that's more concerning. And you might look back at that stat box and say, how is that more concerning than the one catch that Terry McLaurin had in that game? And I'll tell you why. Because since that Philadelphia Eagles game, even though they did lose to the Dallas Cowboys the following week, even with that loss to the Dallas Cowboys, we've seen Cliff Kingsbury unlock some more things on this offense to make sure that Terry McLaurin is not going to get locked down again the way that he was against the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm confident that they're going to do some of those things. I'm not saying Terry's going to go just go hog wild over the Philadelphia Eagles, 120 yards, 2 touchdowns, but he's going to be a much bigger presence in this version of the game than he was the last version of the game. That has been solved to a certain extent. And Jaden Daniels still dealing with ribs, really cold night that night. Short week, no real practices, all kinds of stuff. Cliff Kingsbury actually said, Tyler, that he came into that game with too many things, too many ideas, too many new plays, too many this. Basically, he went overboard. He was extra trying to get that big divisional win. It bit him in the butt. He's learned from that. So it's going to be a better game plan. I'm confident that the offense is going to be okay. The defense, however, this run of just giving up points in the second half, not just the second half, specifically the fourth quarter. The Washington Commanders have now given up double-digit points to opponents in the fourth quarter 6 times this year, including last week against the New Orleans Saints, where they darn near gave that game away. They've given up, if you count quarters 1, 2, and 3, for the entire rest of the season, Tyler, they've done that just 3 times. That is how bad this team has been in the fourth quarter. And most of it's lately. 3 of those 6 times have happened in the last 4 games. That has not been fixed yet. If that doesn't get fixed yet, the Washington Commanders better put up 28, 31 points before they get to the fourth quarter in order to win this game. So there's reason to have belief, but there's also reason to say, until I see you fix that fourth quarter problem, I'm not going to believe you fix that fourth quarter problem. So there's 2 sides of that conversation. However, I will give a little bit of spoiler to anybody who hasn't watched my final Locked On Commanders episode this week. I am predicting a Washington Commanders win this weekend.
Boom. So, hey, if you like the money line, you like the plus 3.5, that's what really matters here. Now, it's time for the Madman matchup of the week. The Los Angeles Rams, who everydayers know that I've been on the Rams train for quite some time now. They go to play the New York Jets. All right. And peek behind the curtain. I asked David, what kind of lines do you like this week? He says, I like Jets +3. Well, that's funny, David, because I like the Rams -3 in this one. It's going to be an interesting game in the crossover Thursday with Locked On Jets, Locked On Rams. Explain.
Just talking about that line, Rams fans know that the Rams, the second you start thinking that they're going to cover is when they do not. They stay away with the Rams. Go find something else to do. I think the biggest thing for the Rams coming into this one is to get out of there in one piece, to be as cautious as you possibly can, because the Rams' path to the postseason does not necessarily include a win against the Jets. If their last 2 games of the season are both division games, they play Arizona and they play Seattle both at home in the final 2 weeks of the season. If they win both of those games, regardless of what happens on Sunday morning against the Jets, the Rams are going to get to where they want to get to. So I don't think that you're going to see a whole bunch of exotic things. I don't think you're going to see things that we haven't seen very much. I think it's going to be a very predictable, steady game plan from Aaron Rodgers.
So, I mean, Travis is saying that they're not even going to try to play. I got to tell you, I just think I don't care about that, Travis. I'm sorry. I don't care. The Rams are a better football team than the New York Jets. The Rams have a good young group of pass rushers who can get to Aaron Rodgers, make him uncomfortable. And at this point in the season, with nothing to play for, Aaron Rodgers is not going to take unnecessary hits that can prevent him from playing next year for this team and this result. Rams go in there. They're a much better coached football team. They're winning that game. Give me the Rams -3. David, you tell me why I'm insane.
Yeah, look, there are going to be some people, if you really know this NFC playoff picture, you're going to say, look, David Harrison covers the Commanders. The Rams are one of those NFC West teams that might compete for a wild card spot. The Commanders compete for a wild card spot. Listen, the NFC West is about to cannibalize itself. Okay, I'm not worried about the NFC West wild card picture. Right. Now, the fact of the matter is the Commanders win this weekend, and either the Rams or the Seahawks lose and the Falcons lose. The Commanders actually clinch a playoff spot. I'm pretty confident the Seahawks are probably going to lose the Minnesota Vikings. Here is why I do believe the Rams could lose to the New York Jets this weekend, and why I would not be confident taking that bet, Tyler, is because of multiple factors. One thing being this is a West Coast, East Coast trip for the Los Angeles Rams. That's never easy. The other thing being the weather's going to be about 22 degrees at kickoff. And as we get further into this game, it's only going to get colder. And again, that's another reason. And for anybody saying Matt Stafford played in Michigan, remember the Detroit Lions play indoors, so don't give me that.
Right.
That's the other part of this. Third part of this, you know what would have happened if Aaron Rodgers was dropping back on the pass where Michael Strahan needed a sack to break the record? Michael Strahan would not have gotten the record, at least not on that play, because Aaron Rodgers would have thrown that ball away. Aaron Rodgers doesn't give anything to anybody. Yeah. He's got back-to-back games with 100-plus passer ratings. Devontae Adams has got back-to-back games with 9 catches over 100 yards and 3 back-to-back games with scores. The New York Jets aren't going to go away quietly. And the Los Angeles Rams, while I agree with you, I've actually been on the boat of they're better than people think they are.
Right.
This has Los Angeles Rams loss written all over it for me.
I hear you. And what Travis was explaining, they don't really need to win this game. They can lose it and then finish their season at home. But that's a dangerous game to play when you're in their position. I don't think.
I mean, if they come into that with that attitude, they're going to lose this game.
They're going to lose. Yeah. And that makes me worried. Because that's classic Los Angeles mentality right there, quite honestly, as I wear my Lakers hoodie. But with that being said, Louis did get the buzzsaw of the madman last week in our Denver Broncos versus Indianapolis Colts bet. So we will see. We will see. I'm 1-0 in the madman matchup. I'll be sure to give you your props if you even that up for me. But with that being said, that is going to do it for today's edition of Locked On NFL. David makes a lot of appearances on the afternoon edition of Locked On NFL with Tony Wiggins, the barber, stepping in the barber shop. So make sure that you guys check that out later today as well. I am your host, Tyler Rowland, the madman, for my co-host, David Harrison. As I tell you every episode, stay safe out there.